On August 2nd, the Constitution made sail from Boston and stood to the eastward in hopes of falling in with some of the British cruisers. She was unsuccessful, however, and met nothing. Then she ran down to the Bay of Fundy, steering along the coast of Nova Scotia, and thence toward Newfoundland, and finally took her station off Cape Race in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where she took and burned 2 briars of little value. On the 15th, she recaptured an American brig from the British sloop Avenger, though the latter escaped. Captain Hull manned his prize and sent her in. He then sailed southward, and on the night of the 18th spoke to a Salem privateer, which gave him news of a British frigate to the south. Thither he stood, and at 2 p.m. on the 19th, in latitude 41 degrees 30 minutes north and 55 degrees west, made out a large sail bearing east-southeast and to leeward, which proved to be his old acquaintance, the frigate Guerriere, Captain Dancrus. It was a cloudy day, and the wind was blowing fresh from the northwest. The Guerriere was standing by the wind on the starboard tack, under easy canvas. She hauled up her courses, took in her top-gallant sails, and at 4:30 backed her maintopsail. Hull then very deliberately began to shorten sail, taking in top-gallant sails, staysails, and flying jib, sending down the royal yards and putting another reef in the topsails. Soon the Englishman hoisted 3 ensigns, when the American also set his colors, one at east masthead and one at the mizzen peak. The Constitution now ran down with the wind nearly aft. The Guerriere was on the starboard tack, and at 5 o'clock opened with her weather guns, the shot falling short, then wore round and fired her port broadside, of which 2 shots struck her opponent, the rest passing over and through her rigging. As the British frigate again wore to open with her starboard battery, the Constitution yawed a little and fired 2 or 3 of her port bow guns. 3 or 4 times the Guerriere repeated this maneuver, wearing and firing alternate broadsides, but with little or no effect, while the Constitution yawed as often to avoid being raked, and occasionally fired one of her bow guns. This continued nearly an hour, as the vessels were very far apart when the action began, hardly any loss or damage being inflicted by either party. At 6 o'clock, the Guerriere bore up and ran off under her topsails and jib, with the wind almost astern, a little on her port quarter, when the Constitution set her main top-gallant sail and foresail, and at 6:05 closed within half-pistol-shot distance on her adversary's port beam. Immediately, furious cannonade opened, each ship firing as the guns bore. By the time the ships were fairly abreast, at 6:20, the Constitution shot away the Guerriere's mizzenmast, which fell over the starboard quarter, knocking a large hole in the counter, and bringing the ship round against her helm. Hitherto she had suffered very greatly, and the Constitution hardly at all. The latter, finding that she was ranging ahead, put her helm a port, and then luffed short round her enemy's bows, delivering a heavy raking fire with the starboard guns, and shooting away the Guerriere's main yard. Then she wore and again passed her adversary's bow, raking with her port guns. The mizzenmast of the Guerriere, dragging in the water, had by this time pulled her bow round till the wind came on her starboard quarter, and so near were the 2 ships that the Englishman's bowsprit passed diagonally over the Constitution's quarterdeck, and as the latter ship fell off, it got foul of her mizzen rigging, and the vessel then lay with the Guerriere's starboard bow against the Constitution's port, or lee quarter-gallery. The Englishman's bow guns played havoc with Captain Hull's cabin, setting fire to it, but the flames were soon extinguished by Lieutenant Hoffman. On both sides the boarders were called away. The British ran forward, but Captain Dancrus relinquished the idea of attacking when he saw the crowds of men on the Americans' decks. Meanwhile, on the Constitution, the boarders and marines gathered aft, but such a heavy sea was running that they could not get on the Guerriere. Both sides suffered heavily from the closeness of the musketry fire. Indeed, almost the entire loss of the Constitution occurred at this juncture. As Lieutenant Bush of the Marines sprang upon the taffrail to leap on the enemy's decks, a British Marine shot him dead, Mr. Morris, the first lieutenant, and Mr. Alwyn, the master, had also both leapt on the taffrail, and both were at the same moment wounded by the musketry fire. On the Guerriere, the loss was far heavier, almost all the men on the forecastle being picked off. Captain Dacres himself was shot in the back and severely wounded by one of the American mizzen-topmen, while he was standing on the starboard forecastle hammocks cheering on his crew. 2 of the lieutenants and the master were also shot down. The ship gradually worked round till the wind was again on the port quarter, when they separated, and the Guerriere's foremast and mainmast at once went by the board, and fell over on the starboard side, leaving her a defenseless hulk, rolling her main deck guns into the water. At 6:30, the Constitution hauled aboard her tacks, ran off a little distance to the eastward, and lay to. Her braces and standing and running rigging were much cut up, and some of the spars wounded, but a few minutes sufficed to repair damages. When Captain Hull stood under his adversary's lee, and the latter at once struck, at 7 o'clock p.m., just 2 short hours after she had fired the first shot. On the part of the Constitution, however, the actual fighting, exclusive of 6 or 8 guns fired during the first hour, while closing, occupied less than 30 minutes.